Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, and I'll just keep my eyes on others who are joining us as we come forward. So for those who, Parimal, I can't remember if you've been new, or for those who are watching this for the first time, the format, just as a reminder, 30 minutes of a conversation about Judy's career, 30 minutes of a conversation about the book. It might be a little bit longer, and then questions and answers or comments that we'll have available to us as well. Keep your microphones muted for the first little bit, and then when you have the time afterwards for comments and questions, we can unmute and have the joining of the conversation. We are recording this session, as I mentioned, and for those who are Ontario lawyers, you are eligible for 1.5 hours of professionalism content through the Law Society of Ontario. And the last thing that I always mention here is that I always look for accountable spaces. We're all responsible for ourselves, our intentions, our words, and our actions. We want to have the conversation, but we have to recognize as well that others are part of this conversation as well. So as we move forward, Judy, when I first heard about the book, it was through another lawyer that introduced me to you. And she referenced some of the various career journeys that you have been on, including being currently, if I'm not mistaken, a writer, a strategy consultant and certified coach, a co-founder and CEO of a tech startup, and a VP at the Toronto Star, and founding publisher of a weekly magazine. Those are the things that we know of. Can you share with us briefly your personal highlights of your career journey? How and when did you start the different elements of it? And how and when did you move on as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So it's really, really nice to be here. I began my career as a marketing analyst on a contract. It wasn't even a full-time gig. I was a contract marketing analyst starting at the Toronto Star, and I did spend the first 13 years of my career there. So in those 13 years, I worked my way up to vice president of digital content. But somewhere in there, I moved through marketing and strategy and advertising departments and found myself in their product development innovation department, leading that department. And at the time, we were looking for, because there was just so much money in publishing back then. It's like complete opposite now, but back then we were just rolling in money. So we were looking for ways to invest in new publications, new products. And my team and I did some research, and we came back with this idea of creating a celebrity gossip magazine for Canadians. And the reason we did it was, at the time, there was just, and still now, but even more so then, there was such a huge proportion of celebrities in Toronto and Vancouver making movies. And they still are, but back there it was huge names. And so what we kept seeing in gossip magazines was Canadian celebrities in American magazines, or American celebrities in Canada in American magazines. So we flipped it around and thought it would be fun to have a celebrity magazine based in Canada. We launched it. It's a brutal industry. And what I remember was this sense, and it was the first of many times I've had this sense where I was doing something. I had launched this thing from scratch, and I was doing it, and then I felt this sense of a clunk. I didn't like the tone of the magazine. It was, as it should be, gossipy and a little bit nasty, and it was very funny. And the people who created it were brilliant, and I have no knock against them. It's just that it started to sit wrong with me. It wasn't how I wanted to be known or how I wanted to live my life. And so I took a step back, and we had other people running it, and it lasted a little while, and then eventually it was shut down. But in that time, I made the switch over to digital, and eventually was promoted up to vice president of digital media. And again, at that moment, I had this internal clunk. As a corporate vice president, I loved, up until that point, my career at the Star had been very exciting, one of development and innovation, and just, getting to do all kinds of incredible things. And then I hit the C-suite level and did not love that. Again, it wasn't me. I was creative and innovative, and I wasn't a person who was great at that time at managing up or dealing with what we would traditionally call office politics and that kind of stuff. It wasn't for me. And so on I moved. And also I had 3 bosses, which nobody should ever have. That may have contributed to my sense of this isn't for me, as I had 3 bosses. So I eventually moved on from there because I wanted to work in the tech world, having been a digital, in charge of digital at the Toronto Star. I thought this is the world for me. Moved on to one tech startup. It wasn't for me again, that same clunk. And then moved on to another one where eventually I was made the CEO. And that was a startup called Shopcaster. And what we were doing was bringing local independent retailers onto the internet and creating a marketplace for them and a back end and full shipping system for them. So anybody could join in minutes and be up and running and ready to ship. To this day, I say our back end was more impressive than Shopify's, and our shipping system was better than Shopify's. It was very, very clever product. But Shopify was just ahead of us. And so after 2 years of that, I was able to sell the company and move on, which was great. But it was during that time where I really started to think about stuckness. So I had felt stuck before in my career, but it was during that, it was very painful. It felt deeply personal that I couldn't move my company forward the way I wanted to. And it was at that point where I started to be really interested in what is it that gets us stuck and why is it such an emotional experience? Even though I successfully moved the company to an exit, I still felt, that there was something, I was missing something that, I just didn't have what it took, and that sat with me for a long time. So from there, I moved into just strategy consultant. All I knew after I left Shopcaster was that I did not want to work in an office 9 to 5 again. And I have not. It's been 10 years and I have not worked in an office 9 to 5, 5 days a week again. But that's all I knew. I didn't know what to do next. And so I started consulting. I was working with various other tech companies around Toronto. And what I started to notice was that same stuckness I had been experiencing in my clients, who were all CEOs of companies that were more successful than Shopcaster, but they still were experiencing this internal feeling of being stuck. And so I, over time, started to realize that this was something I wanted to work on, that I wanted to study, that I wanted to understand, that I wanted to help people with, because of how painful it can feel when you do feel stuck and not sure where to move forward. So eventually I took some coaching training and moved into the coaching world. And that's where things really started to move forward for me, where I found my groove. I found the thing that I should have been doing all those years, though I needed all that experience to get to the place where I could be an effective coach. And then eventually moved into training and eventually launched the Center for Expansive Leadership and the Expansive Women Project. And these are 2 coaching and training organizations that build off of my coaching philosophy, which is called expansive leadership. And that's where you find me today.
I could hear the clunks along the way as you were saying it. Each time there was a clunk, and I could almost hear it in your voice and find the experience. And that's where we find you today, and we're so glad for it. So that journey has led us to where we are. I just want to take a second to acknowledge those who have joined us. We're here with Judy Sims this evening, and the second question that I ask all of my authors is, as a career coach, planning is something that we introduce and that we encourage very, very steadily in people. However, we also recognize that sometimes stuff happens. Serendipity is one of my most favorite words. And I was delighted to see early in your book the quote that you wrote: "Unstuck leaders have room for surprise, serendipity, uncertainty, fear, and discovery." So I ask each of our guests, how much of your career would you say, you sort of described it, but how much of it was planned strategically? And how much of it did chance occurrence have to play with it?
I think the first 2/3 of it were a fair amount of me planning and pushing and thinking it through and setting my sights on something and moving in that direction. And then I would say after I sold my company, that's when the fear and the serendipity together came into the picture, because I didn't know anything. And what was weird about it was I was okay with not knowing what was next. And that was a first for me, because until that time, I had always been seeking what was next. There were 2 big moments for me. One, when I realized that my strategic consulting clients had begun using me as a coach before I even thought I was a coach. So there were, you know, one client, my job was to go take a 2-hour walk with her every Wednesday afternoon, and she would just download and we would discuss, and it was just her moment for herself to really start to, she was a CEO, to really start to understand her company and the people she was working with. And I started to realize, like, oh, I think I'm coaching, because it kept happening with other clients as well. Not to that degree, but they were using me in a coaching capacity. And then two, that same client, years later, after I had, you know, become a full coach and was doing everything, she called me up and said, I have a group of people, young leaders, we're growing really quickly because her company did really well. And we need some training. Can you come in and do some leadership training? And I said, I don't do leadership training. And she said, well, you do now, because I need you. And she basically twisted my arm until I agreed to do it. And what's funny about that is the leadership training, that program has evolved over the past 4 years into my favorite thing that I do. And so it's very profitable for my company, and it's also just like a complete, and it's just such a joy for me to do that work. So that was serendipity. That was me essentially being told,
you've got to do this, and okay, I better figure it out.
Exactly.
I love that. No, I love that. There's so much to cover in your book, so we're going to get started. And as I said before, we're going to try and at around 8 o'clock open it up to conversation. But if people have questions along the way, put it into the chat, and we can try and blend it into the conversation. I mentioned to Judy earlier today by email that I'm going to try and work on letting go of full control sometimes, and we'll, you know, just co-create with everybody here today. So we'll start that and see how we move forward. Judy, you started to allude to it, but let's dive into the book with your why. Why was this book so important for you to research, to interview people, to write, and then to share with the world? What was the reason for it?
It really was the stuckness I had been feeling myself, and that release from my tech startup, and that floating in space and kind of not knowing what was next. Yes, it was so freeing that I thought there must be something good in this. There must be something good in this, not trying to determine everything. And so, and then I started seeing the stuckness in my clients, and I began my coaching training. And that's when I thought, you know, I think there's some people who don't get stuck. And one of them was a good friend of mine who, you know, was a budding startup CEO at the same time as me. And by the time I sold my company, his had been valued at $100 million. And so he was kind of the first person where I thought, okay, what is he doing that is different? Spend some time with him, and then just decided to interview as many people as I could about their experiences with being stuck and getting unstuck. And so I interviewed 100 people in 12 countries and 30 odd cities in the world, about stuckness. And what I realized was, one, it's pervasive, and two, it's personal. And what might feel stuck for me doesn't feel stuck for you necessarily. And that it is everywhere, and that there are ways to manage your feelings of stuckness. And so that's what I did. It was more just, you know, there's that old saying that a lot of research is me search.
Never heard that before. That's good.
Yeah, that's what I was doing, a little me search as I was deciding what was coming next in my life. Also, I just really like writing books. So that was, it was just seemed like I like writing books. There's this opportunity, I should go in that direction. And then it just, you know, the amount of research, I loved every minute of it, every minute of actually writing it as well. And in addition to the message and the why.
Judy, just out of curiosity, did the word stuck and stuckness, was that part of the vocabulary from the very, very beginning, or did it evolve?
Yeah, it was from the beginning. So right now I'm running the Expansive Woman Project, but first I ran something called the Unstuck Project, which was where I collected all the information and how I got all the interviews as people would volunteer to become a part of the Unstuck Project. So yeah, it was based on stuckness right from the beginning.
Okay, all right. So that word was with you from your experience to the decision to write about it, through to the interviews and the research, and then of course to the book, and then the project that you referenced. So let's begin the book. You start with explaining why people get stuck, and I really like this part of it. And you introduce us to two concepts that you keep weaving in and out throughout the book. Then the should and could values, and I've talked about values oftentimes, but I liked how you distinguish should and could. And our needs, boy, did this ever hit home, for certainty and significance. Let's talk about both of those for a little bit, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, should and could values. So we think about values, we think about, principles that we have for ourselves. Most of us aren't even really aware of them until somebody really starts asking us about our values. But we are living them to some degree all the time because they're almost like our operating system. There's this underlying way that we see and move through the world. And I divide them into three kinds of values, but we're going to talk about two today. So the first is the should values. And those are values about who and what we think we should be.
Yeah.
And those values are instilled in us from a very young age, first from our parents and teachers. So, women hear a lot, be a good girl, or boys don't cry, or, don't speak up in class, and those kinds of things. They are set upon us with good intentions of keeping us safe and hoping that they will result in us being good people, but they can over time become very damaging. So some of them are helpful, be polite, that's fine, right? And some of them aren't helpful. And it's the unhelpful ones that tend to stick with us because we never measure up to the should values. And so there's this dichotomy that we're either good girls and boys because we live up to our should values, but we never do. So that makes us bad girls and boys, right? So there's the bad person, good person, back and forth. So should values, it starts with parents and teachers, but then as we move on in our lives, so, in adolescence, all of a sudden our friends become really important. And so they have thoughts about what our hair should look like and which bands we should like and who we should hang out with and what our clothes should look like. And then as we choose a major and go into university, there should values associated with each major as well. There's like your psych majors are very different than your accounting majors, for example. And then when we enter the world and have a career, our profession and our workplace also have their own sets of should values. So, they can be in law, always be logical, always apply reason, and also work, bill, right? So there's like the two sides of every should value, the one meant to be good for you, but the actual effect of it often isn't. So those are should values. They're at the bottom of perfectionism and imposter syndrome. It's when we don't feel like we're living up to those should values that we start to feel like we're not good enough, that we're not worthy, and we become fearful and what I call contractive. So that's what should values do. Not my favorite things.
No, and they're difficult, but they're in us all the time. And what about the could values then?
So could values are the values we choose for ourselves, and they are the qualities of life and character that are most important to us as individuals. So those are things like creativity or independence or integrity, or I have a couple clients right now who have fun as a could value. Imagine that, fun is a value. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Connection, family. They're about ways we want to be in the world, people we want in our lives, the type of person we want to be, what we want to create in the world. And those are the core of who we are. So that's when I talk about grounding, I'm talking about grounding ourselves in the could values, in who and what we know we could be instead of who and what we think we should be. And could values make us bigger, they expand us, and should values make us smaller, they contract us. That's how you can tell the difference between the two. So if one of your values is accountability, it might be a should value or a could value, but how you interpret it, does accountability make you smaller or does accountability make you bigger? And that's how we know where it falls.
That's a good distinction. Good distinction. And figuring out our values is a conversation. But let's think though about the next aspect within this, certainty and significance. You talked a lot about that, and you kept coming back to it. And I'm so grateful to you. Let's hear a little bit about that.
So certainty is our need to feel comfortable. It's our need to feel safe and secure. It's our need to feel, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing inherently wrong with our need for certainty. It's just that we all have it. We all need to feel safe and secure. It's at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid of needs. It's food, shelter, that kind of stuff. And to feel emotionally secure is also in certainty as well, emotionally safe. What becomes a problem? Oh, I'll tell you about, we'll do significance. Significance is the need to feel validated and that we matter as a person. Again, Nothing wrong with that. We all need to feel like we matter, and that we are validated, and that people think we're worthy. That's it. The problem comes when we get over attached to those needs. So when we are over attached to certainty, it can make us extremely risk averse. It can make us stay in one place for too long. It can make us shut down opportunities. It can do all kinds of things because we're so interested in feeling safe that we don't want to ever be uncomfortable. So when we're avoiding discomfort, we're leaning into our need for certainty. When we get over attached to our need for significance, that means we're seeking validation outside of ourselves, right? So validate me. And that can lead us to be boastful or prideful. It can lead us to dismiss ideas that aren't our own. It can lead us to talk over other people. It can lead us to shut down things we don't like. So these two needs, when they hold hands, and they often do because they're best friends, right? So certainty and significance are always together. The first thing we want to be certain of is our own significance. That's the way to think of it. When they combine, they make all the problems in the world, because certainty and significance together are about control. Right? And when we think about leadership, we think, oh, control, that's what leaders do. But it's not at all. So what certainty and significance do is they lock us. They create blind spots, terrible blind spots, because when we want to be certain and significant, we just have this tunnel vision of what we want, and we fail to see what's actually going on around us. And when we have those needs together, we have a tendency to prioritize our own personal comfort over the truth of what's actually happening around us. And when we do that as leaders, we miss out on so much, and we make very, very poor decisions. And leaders who do that are excellent at creating results that no one wants.
That came up in your book a few times, and it was interesting to read that. We'll come back to that. I guess one question before we move to the next specific spot, all of what you're describing now ebbs and flows throughout our career, right? It's not just at any one stage. It can happen at any time, whether we are starting our careers, whether we are transitioning, whether we are moving into C-suite roles or into partnership roles. We're not immune from the control of certainty and significance at any particular time. Is that right?
I think they actually grow as we move up in our career.
Okay.
And they're also life stage dependent. So when you're 25 and you don't have a mortgage, your need for certainty drops. Your need for significance might be high, because you need to feel validated and that you're going to get promoted and all of that kind of stuff. When you're 44 and you have 2 kids, a mortgage, and you need to hold on to your job, your need for certainty starts to go up. And sometimes the need for significance does as well. So yeah, it ebbs and flows over time. But you do see a connection to life stage and the growth of the need for certainty.
That's good to keep in mind as we move forward. So the next part, before we get into the process, you talk about the steps of becoming an unstuck leader, but you take a chapter to outline the traits of this new kind of leader, an unstuck leader, what they're like, and introduce the term watery, which I love the concept, and I could visualize it. Can you tell us about the traits that are relevant to you for an unstuck leader?
The number one trait is an ability to embrace complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity with equanimity. That's what wateriness is, right? So we live in a world of complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity, and that is only growing. And I think we can easily say in the last decade, those things have multiplied in ways that we couldn't have predicted. Nobody could have predicted COVID. Well, people could have predicted COVID, but we chose not to. Interest rates are one of those things that's having a massive impact on people right now, inflation. So there's always this complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity going on in the world around us. When we have a high need for certainty and significance, that is threatening, and it causes us to contract and adopt a defensive stance. What an unstuck leader does is they see those things as inevitable, and they seek opportunity within them. And even if it's scary, they will expand within complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And that's the wateriness I'm talking about. They're easy. They find it easier to go with the flow, so to speak, of what's going on. They shift directions quickly. I often use an example of like, be a Roomba, like the little vacuum cleaner yeah, a Roomba hits a wall. It doesn't beat itself up. It doesn't blame the wall for being there. It just turns in a different direction and goes the other way.
Yeah, I like that. Okay.
Yeah, that's what these unstuck leaders tend to do. Is it's not personal. Like, so much of what makes stuck bad is that personal aspect about it makes me a bad girl, right? If I'm stuck, I haven't lived up to a should value, something's gone wrong. So they are able to let go of that and be more flowy and expansive in nature.
And just so that we have this part of the conversation, when we talk about leaders, we're not necessarily talking just about CEOs or just about senior partners or just about the directors or executive level. Can you sort of just give us a quick synopsis of what you're defining as a leader in particular?
Yeah, we're all called to be leaders at some point in our lives. We can be the leader of the people waiting at the bus stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's going to get on the bus first? If somebody falls down, who's going to go and help them? There's always a leader present. There's always someone. So we're in various leadership roles in volunteering, in our homes, among our friend groups. There's lots of places where leadership arises. So, and even at work, when we're not officially somebody's boss, we work in teams that require leadership in unofficial capacities as well. So it's really, it's almost like leadership of yourself, like get yourself in shape first before you can lead other people. So it doesn't have to be somebody who's a CEO or a C-suite person at all.
We're not talking title only. Absolutely. I love that. So your book, and even on the back, it has the How to Become an Unstuck Leader, and you've got 5 steps that you reference. So we're going to talk about those. Stop, assess, align, listen and observe, let go, co-create, and say yes. But before you get to those steps, you warn us, and I really appreciate this. When I saw it at first a couple of weeks ago when I started reading the book, you said it's going to be hard, it's going to be uncomfortable, and at times it's going to be exhausting. That can almost be scary for a reader if they're at that precipice of, I want to move forward. Why did you feel it was necessary to give this kind of a warning to your reader as you move forward?
Because of that comfort over truth thing.
Okay.
So what gets us stuck and what makes us unhappy in the world is when we prioritize our own personal comfort over the truth of what's happening around us. When we flip the equation, we prioritize truth over what's comfortable. It's painful and it's scary and it requires of us something more and something deeper than how most of us are used to leading, which is, according to leadership maxims, or here are, a checklist of things that great leaders do. But what I talk about from the first intro in the book is that it's not about so much the things that great leaders do. It's about becoming the kind of person who does the things that great leaders do. And that's painful because it means taking a really good look at yourself and how you're moving through the world, your own needs for certainty and significance, your own tendencies of prioritizing comfort over truth, and then working on them and coming out the other side. And then you come out the other side and the rest of the world around you is still back in the old comfort over truth place. So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy, but you have to make the choice that that's how you're going to live your life and then bring the people along. I call it inviting them into agency, inviting the people around you to come into this place with you.
You were definitely role modeling it by just putting it out there at the very beginning. We're going to get uncomfortable and let's do it and let's move forward. So in the very first step, you introduce us to a few concepts that get us started. The first step really is about looking inwards, and to use the language that you and I had discussed at one point, personal grounding. You reference adult life cycle renewal process, and then you also reference what you've already referenced a little bit, healthy expansive and healthy contractive states, and about discovering our values and purpose. There's a lot here that we focus on to go deep and inwards, in particular in the first step. And that's a huge part. Oftentimes, especially those who've gone on to professional schools, don't really get the opportunity to focus inwards. It's always sort of external. So you're asking us to take some time and actually focus inwards. Tell us a little bit about this first step of personal grounding.
Yeah, the first step is a doozy.
Right? You started off with a punch right there.
It's a really big step. Yeah, until we become the kind of person who does the things that great leaders do, we're not going to get anywhere. We're just going to stay stuck. And we might have the illusion of not being as stuck from time to time, but really we're stuck as humans. So what I'm talking about, that wateriness you refer to, I refer to in the book, and the bulk of my work now is about entering this thing called an expansive state. So we'll just take a step back and understand a contractive state, which is a state where we are prioritizing should over could and comfort over truth. And we come in that place very reactive, defensive, and judgmental. And most of us live in that place most of the time. It feels like life is happening to us. We look at our to-do list in the morning. We're like, oh, ugh. I don't want to do anything. So we dread a meeting that's coming up, or we dread a difficult conversation that we're going to have to do. And we live in this defensive, reactive, judgmental state. When we're in that state, we are essentially powerless because it feels like things are happening to us and that we have no agency or control. Certainty and significance flare up. Right? Certainty and significance are about control. So when we feel we're out of control, those are the two needs that come into play, and we start reacting rather than responding. We make poor decisions. Our cortisol levels go up. Our creativity gets shut down. All kinds of things happen in that contractive state, which, by the way, is where most of us are about 80% of the time.
Even unstuck leaders are there for a while?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, the difference is recognizing it and getting out of it as quickly as possible. And I would think that the depth of it isn't as bad. There's a thing called a contractive cycle, which is a self-reinforcing cycle of doom that just kind of goes down and down and down and down. And what's happening in that state is they're not living their values. They are subverting their core values to feel safe. Right? So they're prioritizing the should values over the could values. And they are, in essence, betraying themselves. And on some level, they know it. And it feels terrible. And it makes you smaller, contracts you, defensive, reactive, judgmental. So that's the contractive state, where most of us are a lot of the time. The opposite of that is the expansive state. And when we're in an expansive state, we are grounded in those core values. I just saw you adopt the expansive posture.
As soon as you said it.
An expansive state, it's from a place of physical and emotional grounding. So when you see this posture, that's expansive posture. So we are grounded in solid core values and purpose. We are grounded in the truth of who we are, yet open to new ideas, people, and situations. So it's this grounding and the opening that allows us to reach for new heights of achievement, of success, of creativity, of energy, of whatever it is you're looking for. It's the end of self-betrayal and the full recognition of the truth of who you are, prioritizing truth of the situation around you over your own personal comfort, being in alignment with those values. That's what allows you to get unstuck, is that feeling. The shift is hard because it requires you to do things like end all blame, accept 100% responsibility for moving yourself forward from this place, letting go of wanting to be right. There are so many things that have to happen for you to make that shift. And that's why the warning.
No, I appreciate that. No, and it's funny because whatever the chapter was in the first step, number 3, I think, or 4, it takes a while to actually allow yourself to think about what's important to you, what are your values, what is your purpose. It doesn't come easily for some people, right? For a lot of people, and so being able to stay in there for a little bit and really think honestly about it is a critical first step, because you can't, if you don't have those values, the other things won't be able to align, right?
That's it, exactly. Yeah. Think of, like, I often use yoga as an example, where, like, if you're trying to do a yoga stretch, your yoga instructor might say, ground your legs into the ground, open your chest so you can reach forward. Like that's literally what has to happen. If you're not grounded in the truth of who you are, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. You're invisible, actually, and you're floating through the world. Nobody can see who you are. You're just armored up and defensive.
Once you've established your value, or you've reconnected or connected for the first time to your values and your purpose, and you are in an expansive state, then the next step from going inwards, we're going outwards, to others and to systems. And this is interesting because I hadn't really thought about the systems part of it. You focus not just on the individuals around us, but also the systems where we interact with them. I loved your focus, the saying, where focus goes, energy flows. And it's, again, another wonderful visual that is repeated throughout the book. How does this relate to the theme of firefighting addiction? Now we're looking at sort of the systems, we're looking at people, and fixes that fail. I think that's how you labeled firefighting addiction. I want us to talk about that a little bit, as they don't seem to get to the real problems. I thought firefighting was a good thing. I know I resonated with this topic. Speak a little bit more about both the firefighting addiction and also generally the focus on systems and individuals.
Yeah. So firefighting, or hero behavior, as we often call it, is actually contractive, believe it or not. A real actual firefighter going to fight a fire is not. But I often think, I ask people to think of it this way. Can you think of a single happy superhero?
That's an interesting way of saying it.
They're a miserable bunch of people for the most part.
Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, yeah, they're not that happy. Okay.
Really unhappy. Batman, oh my goodness, yeah. He needs a vacation. So yeah, hero behavior. And so what firefighting addiction is, so there's, in the world of systems, leadership theory, which is an emerging theory of leadership coming out of MIT. And there's some very popular people, Peter Senge, Otto Scharmer, who are developing this new philosophy of leadership around identifying systems. The way I would say it is a great systems thinker has the ability to see the forest and the trees.
Or in the trees, you said.
And the trees. They see, right? So they're able to zoom out, see the forest, zoom back in, see the people in the forest and the trees in the forest. And so a great systems thinker can see not only how individuals are contributing to stuckness in the organization, but how those individuals are creating systems that create stuck within the organization. And the biggest one, and kind of like the grandmother of all of the maladaptive systems, we call them, is fixes that fail. So the best example, just to get you warmed up to what this means, is, let's say you buy an old house, you buy a 100-year-old house, and it has old faulty wiring in it, and little fires keep popping up all over your house, right? So your solution is to buy more fire extinguishers instead of fixing the wiring. That's what firefighting or fixes that fail means. So it means there's an essential core problem that we are actively ignoring because it makes us uncomfortable and it will be difficult to solve. Sometimes in coaching, we call it a quality problem. So it's a quality problem that, if solved, would actually contribute to propelling us into new heights in our career, or new levels of productivity, or new, ability to sleep at night without a fire starting in our bedroom, right? Like it's a thing that if we solved for this difficult, scary problem, things would get better. And we ignore it. And instead we direct our attention to all the little things that the big problem is causing. We focus on little problems called safe problems. So, I can't start that big project until my desk is clean and I've, met with 30 people and I've created an outline, and then maybe I've gone back in and edited the outline again, and I'm just going to keep doing that. Or we have a client who is very problematic, and we just keep putting out fires with the client instead of having a difficult conversation with the client. Avoiding difficult conversations is one of the biggest causes of fires, actually, in any organization.
So true.
But we can use these little fires to distract us from quality problems. We can use safe problems for a number of reasons. The biggest is that they meet a lot of our needs. Right? So they make us feel excitement. So they give us a sense of variety. They will make us feel very significant, especially if we become known as a problem solver or a firefighter.
The fixer, yes.
I'm the fixer. I will come in and fix whatever is going on. And so it's very gratifying. I've seen organizations that have built an entire culture around being firefighters. which is, it's like, we just, things are constantly blowing up on us, but we always save the day, and they love it and they celebrate it, but nobody's saying the other half of it, which is like, we're in complete disarray, and, and we're not solving any big problems. We're just constantly putting out little fires. It can give us a sense of certainty because we can feel needed. And that makes us feel comfortable. And it can make us feel very connected to the people that we work with, because there's the camaraderie involved in solving all the little fires, putting out all the little fires. What they don't do is solve the big, important, actual problems. So it's a process of constantly prioritizing urgent over important, so that important never gets solved for. So yeah, that's it's a tricky one because it is so gratifying. It's addictive.
Prioritizing urgent over important. And I think that's a critical comment that you just made right there. Because many of us think that the urgent has to be looked at first. And to your quote, if that's where your focus is, that's where your energy is going to go to, as opposed to what's really important. So I appreciate that. Let's move on to step 3 now, that you say for professionals. I think this might be one of the hardest steps. Leaders need to be in control. We talked about that earlier. Don't they need to be in control of situations? But you're telling us, or you're suggesting to us, that we make better choices when we actually let go of, yikes, stability, of inauthentic power. I kind of agree with that. Message control, covert ego. I like the covert ego, being right, and what is ending. That was an interesting component. And as part of this, you ask us to learn never to take anything personally. That was a real comment that I read. Both of these are tough asks. Why and how can we do this?
We do it because you can't get unstuck until you do. You're just until you can let go, you're going to be stuck, right? We do it because it shifts us out of contraction and into agency and expansion. Because the moment we let go is the moment we start to take charge. Right? It's the moment we become agentic. It's the moment we are now responsible, 100% responsible for moving ourselves forward. When we are grasping into the past, when we are saying we can make things like they were, we can think of a certain person who's running around saying he can make a certain country great again.
Yeah.
These are contractive statements that keep us small, because nobody can do that. Certainty is a complete illusion. There's never certainty. The last 3 years have proven that beyond anybody's comprehension. There's no such thing as certainty. Letting go of being right. In coaching, when a client says to me, I don't know, I'm like, yeah,
that's a good thing, right?
you don't know. Good for you. You don't know. And now you're open to something else. So it's letting go of wanting to be right, I think, as well. Like if I wrote the book again, I would qualify it with it. You might very well be right. I'm not saying make yourself wrong, but the strong inner desire, the need for validation that makes you need to be right, that's where we run into trouble. So when we let go, we start to expand and we start to see things a little differently. We open up to possibility. That's the opening, is the letting go, right? The grounding is stopping, assessing, aligning, observing what's going on around us. So we're prioritizing truth over comfort. And then the opening is, okay, I'm going to let go of some stuff. Message control is such a big one. Now, I'm not saying a lawyer should go into a courtroom and not try to control the message. I don't mean in the context of doing your job. That's control that all you want. I'm talking about when you go back to the office at the end of the day, trying to control the message about what happened in the courtroom isn't going to always work out, because one, if you lie, you will get caught. If you are silent, others will seek to fill the void with their own stories. And it can create cynicism. It can create a much bigger problem than you had. It can create, if an organization that is very opaque, where there's not a lot of transparency, is very gossipy. And there's a lot of backstabbing and stories flying back and forth and rumors about people. It's very, very unpleasant. So that's what I mean by message control, is as much as you can, and even a little bit more, be as transparent as you can with your colleagues about what's actually going on.
Boy, I know of leaders who would cringe the thought of not being transparent, of being transparent with their team. No, you got to hold back. You can't tell them everything. And there's some, I don't, can you tell them everything? It's a choice that people are making not to be open or transparent with colleagues or with team members. But the never take anything personally. You started talking about that in, I think, the very first chapter in the introduction, when you talked about your crying spell on the airplane and somebody said you don't take it personally. And now you're telling us, learn to never take anything personally, to let it go. How? Isn't it what we're all about? There
Okay.
seems to be this challenge,
Yeah.
not taking it personally.
We love to take things personally.
Yeah.
Because it's all about us. Why wouldn't we take it personally? We're the center of everything. So
Except we're
one,
not.
it's an ego thing, right? So we're going to take it personally because we believe other people's actions and words are motivated by us somehow. When that's no. Very rarely are they actually thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. The way I like to put it is we all have our stuff. We all have our past traumas. We all have our past bad bosses. We all have, the way we were raised, the should values that were imposed upon us, the cultures we were raised in. We all have these things, all of us, and we bring them to work. And then we mix them up with everybody else's stuff. And so there's just like it's a bubbling cauldron of stuff going on at work. So we can't take it personally because they're dealing with their own stuff and they have their own set of should values, and they're being reactive, judgmental, and defensive because they are in pain and contracted, not because of anything to do with you. And our brains are structured in such a way that it's very hard for us to actually tell the difference between our emotions towards a person and our emotions of just physical stuff that's going on in our body, right? So, a classic example, you feel nervous because you have butterflies in your stomach. And so you interpret it as nervous, but it could just be that you're excited and looking forward to something as well. Well, our brains are doing that all the time, interpreting situations. So to take it personally, it's so much easier to not take it personally. It's much easier to say, okay, where did that come from? And I'm going to examine which of their needs was affected. Are they feeling a threat to their sense of validation or control? Are they feeling frightened of what might be coming and just seeking to understand rather than automatically make it all about us? It so really is.
I love the if anybody's got the book with them, page 187, the little walnut-shaped thingy in your brain called the, I hope I'm not saying this wrong, human insula. Is that the insula? And as you describe it, so remember, not everything is about you. Our brain is making connections about things, but it's not about you necessarily. There's other things going on. I think just that reminder is a really good thing. If somebody's not talking to you or doesn't respond to your email, it might not be because they don't like you or because you're a bad person. They may have a whole lot of crap going on in their life that is keeping them from doing that. So I think that's a really good reminder for leaders as we move forward. Again, another one of those aha moments. So let's go. I know we've got a few more minutes, and in about 10 minutes, we're going to open it up to the group. But your next step is about co-creating with your team. And it gets us to go deeper now with our relationships in particular. And some people like relationships and others are a little nervous about them. I love the quote on page 205. If purpose and mission are the heartbeat of an organization, then emergence is its lifeblood. It flows and nourishes and energizes. You tell us, Judy, that an unstuck leader needs to listen, show up, and also help create and normalize human tension and conflict. And in this book club, we talked with Leanne Davey about conflicts, and it's not a bad thing to have conflict. What are some of the key highlights for a leader as she co-creates in an environment?
So co-creation is important because of that old complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity thing. So the world as we are in it right now, in most professions, is too complex for any single person to understand fully. So one, we just have to accept we don't know everything. And that co-creation will open up more room for possibility and solutions and all the good stuff that we're actually after. Two, this thing called emergence. So, and this is again a systems leadership theory concept. So emergence is technically a nonlinear change in a complex system. So for example, a government regulates something, a supplier changes something, a customer says something, a relationship changes, markets change, interest rate changes. There's always a sea of things emerging outside of our organization. And there's also a sea of things emerging inside of our organization. So people are changing, situations are changing, lines of reporting are changing, relationships are either growing or fracturing within an organization, and all of these things are emerging. And so what we tend to do is when we're prioritizing comfort over truth is we ignore what's emerging because it makes us uncomfortable. We're just like, no, everything's going to stay the same, or I can make it great again. But nothing new is going to happen that's going to throw us off course. And so what emergence is what a great leader does in the co-creation process is they talk to people inside and outside the organization. They talk to customers or clients, they talk to suppliers, they talk to educators, they talk to people in the industry. And the more people they talk to, the more of a sense of what's emerging they have. When you are able to sense what's emerging, you become incredibly valuable to your organization. You become almost like an oracle. And you can start to get your sense of significance through the relationships that you have, and through your ability to connect people and things, and through your ability to derive meaning from what is emerging around you. It is so undervalued. And I think in the law profession, there's this teaching, like, just put your blinders on, sit down and work, when so much of great legal practice happens outside the office, like the relationships that we build and the knowledge that we build outside of the office. So that's the big thing, first with co-creation. And second with co-creation is it introduces my two favorite phrases in the English language, which are how can we, answered with we can if. Yeah. So any tension or any problem that conflict that you're experiencing can be addressed with those two phrases. And I use them in everything from like planning my business or launching a new company to planning how I'm having foot surgery in 2 weeks. How am I going to get through the holidays with a big giant boot on my foot? How can I can if, right? I have to get all my shopping done very early this year. Things have to happen. So you can use it at any level, but how can we can if shifts perception away from problem, away from pointing fingers, away from blame, and towards solution. So it's focusing us on a positive thing. It's focusing on, okay, so how can we create the thing that we want to create, or do that thing faster, or serve that client in this particular way, or make that thing happen, and then sit down and think, well, we can if, and really work out what the solution is. So that's what co-creation is about. It's about shifting again out of contraction and into expansion.
You have a really great example in the book in terms of, making it a little tense for people or team members as they come up with different possibilities in the brainstorming ideas that might be sort of at odds one with the other. And then thinking about that, how can we, and then we can if, and the examples that you give are really useful and just as a nice guide as people move forward to it. So grateful for that. And talking, it's interesting how you said, talking to people, not talking at people, but talking to people attentively, not having these things or whatever else interrupt, being really focused on listening to learn and to make the other person understand and feel that they are being understood, heard, and listened to. So I think that's really an important part that sometimes through this age of COVID and Zoom calls and whatnot, we may have lost a little bit of that, but we're coming back to it, I think.
Yeah, but you and I are here. We've never met in person.
No, that's true.
Right?
You're right.
Yeah. So, and we met through a person I've only met in person once.
I did not realize that. That's incredible. Okay, so there we go.
Yeah. So yeah, it's absolutely possible. And I think what if for any other reason why you should be talking to and with as many people as possible is because who do you want to offer a job to? Who do you want to promote in an organization? Who's more likely to make partner than somebody who is well connected and knows lots of things? It's just a good career move on top of everything.
Point. No, good point. And we'll leave the conversation of, if you're feeling like you are more of an introvert and can't, well, it's not, there's different ways of doing it, whether you're introvert, extrovert, or anything else. In the interest of time, I just want to ask you sort of the last step. I've often reminded clients and students that law is a practice, which means you have to keep practicing. So I was really interested when I saw your fifth step about leadership for unstuck leadership, that it's similarly a practice. And you say being in a constant state of learning and improvement, which I love. This practice, though, requires a commitment. Anything that we do requires a commitment of saying yes to change and growth and responsibility. And boy, can that be terrifying, responsibility especially. So what's step 5 saying yes all about, perhaps specifically related to boundaries and connections, because boundaries are a big thing with most professionals and most people.
So saying yes is the moment you become expansive.
Okay.
Right? That's the moment. That's yes, I am grounded in the truth of who I am and open to new ideas, people, and situations. I'm saying yes, right? So I'm allowing. I'm allowing instead of fighting everything. When we're contractive, we're physically, you can see somebody who's contractive because they're literally all hunchy, they're armored up, there's nothing that's going to penetrate. So the saying yes is the saying yes to living in the world as a person who's moving through the world and interacting with other people. It's also like it's a practice because it's really, really hard to do all the things that have led up to this moment of yes. It's hard to remember the truth of who you are. It's hard to wrangle your needs for certainty and significance so that they're not getting in your own way, right? It's hard to co-create with other people. It's hard to let go of things. It's hard to see the truth, overcome for all of these things are really hard. And your brain, again, is wired in such a way that the minute you don't have to do those things anymore, it will say like, let's stop that and go back to being comfortable because I don't like this. So you have to create a practice that will keep you in that space as often as possible.
It's like gym, or it's like running, or it's like, I'll use those two examples. It has to become a habit or a practice, so that you remember there's a good reason for that discomfort, right? And I think it's a good way of thinking about unstuck leadership as a practice. Boundaries, though, can I ask you just to speak a little bit more about boundaries? Because boy, those can be problematic for a lot of us.
So the big boundaries we're always setting are how to spend our time, who to allow into our lives, and the old where focus goes, energy flows one, where to direct our focus. And that's it. Those are the 3 decisions at work we're making all the time, right? So how are we spending our time? Yeah, are we spending it between, and it's for lawyers, it's such a, like, time is everything, right? It's like time is money. Like, it's like this is a very, very big one. So looking at how we spend our time, do we need to be in every meeting, or what's most important over what's urgent in this moment? How am I being very conscious of how I'm dividing up my time and doing it in advance as much as possible? What I see with lawyers that gets them in trouble is the firefighting habit, which means I meant to spend my time here, but I spent it all over there because something urgent popped up or whatever it is. So how we spend our time is a really, really, really big one. And that includes time for ourselves and time for our own, what I call a healthy contraction, which is our time to step out of, and just allows, otherwise, if you keep expanding, you're just going to pop like a balloon. So you do have to step out of that, and time for recovery, time for rejuvenation, time to let our brains recover so that we can show up the next day as we are. So one, just being very conscious of time. And I think, billable hours is important. And we should set what we think that is and how we're going to get there, but we also have to manage the other time as well. The other boundaries, who we allow into our lives. This is really about, at a crunchy granola term, this is about vibes. Do you want an angry, negative person around you all the time? No, probably not. So you're going to set up boundaries to avoid that. Like, you can't always at work avoid those people, but you can set up boundaries so that you interact with them as little as possible. You want to be around the positive people who have careers you aspire to, who have lives you aspire to. That's where you want to spend your who you want to spend your time with. There's a great phrase from when I wrote the book, he was a writer, a great writer called Wes Moore. He has a phrase called, "Don't let people who don't matter too much matter too much." And that's such a huge one. And he just last year was elected to be the first Black governor of Maryland. It's like, I've been following his career since he was like in his 20s. It's crazy. So he's got so he did that, and he's now a mayor or governor of Maryland. So it works. And then the last one is where to direct your attention. Are you going to direct your attention on just problems, just blaming, feeling sorry for yourself, being in that contractive state? Or are you going to focus your attention on solutions? How can we can if. You are making that choice. And it can be very addictive to be in the contractive triangle as well, because, or contractive space, because like firefighting, it releases stress hormones. And so it gives you a boost. That they are stress hormones, so over the long term they're really not good for you, and it can feel good to vent and gossip and be defensive and get into hero mode. If I don't do it, no one will, right? Like all of those things can be very addictive, but they're like scratching an itch until it bleeds. Like it feels good until it doesn't. So you have to make a conscious choice to shift over to expansion every time.
And you know, again, part of that practice idea, and we're going to open it up to questions or comments after this next comment, but we're not always going to get it right? You've been doing this for so long. As I was looking at it, I had the, oh gosh, moments I messed that up, right? I can think about examples where I messed that up, but it's a matter of sort of being aware, being intentional, and coming back to it as often as we can. We're going to mess up. We're going to screw it up at some point or other. And that's okay. That's human. But just keep coming back to it, right? I just wonder if you have any, especially for, you talked about the perfectionism that many of us have. If we can't do it perfectly, then we won't do it all. No, just get started on it. What do you think?
Yeah, just get started on it. And then just introduce these two words into your world, which is not yet.
Not yet.
I'm not perfect yet. I don't know everything I need to know yet.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And the other thing is to accept when you're in contraction, like, okay, I am feeling very threatened. I'm feeling uncertain. I'm feeling unvalidated. I feel bad, and just saying, yep, that's where you feel, that's where you are right now. Not like if we deny it and try to push it away, I think it's going to come back at us bigger and worse. But if we can just say, okay, here I am, I'm feeling a lack of control, I'm feeling a threat to my sense of safety, I'm feeling a threat to my sense of dignity, this is where I am right now. And then consciously shifting from that place, it makes the shift a little bit easier, because you can't just go from like anger to like not angry.
You have to live in that space and that discomfort for a little bit, as long as you understand to move forward.
And accept it. Like you said, we all mess up. And I've been teaching this stuff for a long time. And every day I'm like, oh, Lord, I'm beating myself up over something, right? And so it's accepting and shifting.
I appreciate that. I've got another question. I'm going to leave it until I open it up. If people have questions or comments, put the little hand thingy up or unmute the little. I know there's a right way of saying it, but Tom, you've got your hand up this way, so I'll take that. Let's. I think Tom has a question first, so join us, Tom.
Okay.
Hello,
Judy, if I may, what I read and heard is the word destiny kept on occurring to me. And would you say that where you are now is your destiny? Or how did you know this was your destiny? Was it trial and error?
I think I used to think that there was a destiny thing. I thought that when I had that celebrity magazine, I thought that was my destiny. That's a funny thing. And it turned out to so not be. Where I am right now, the word I would use is that it's aligned with me, right? It's aligned with the core of who I am. But I'm not sure I would use the word. To me, destiny sounds closed. That's just my perception of it. Like I've reached my destiny and now I'm done. But what I see is that it is so aligned with who I am. I feel it pulling me. I feel flow from it. I feel, when I work with a client, I lose time, all of those wonderful things that happen when you're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And if I were to say what my destiny is now, it's like, well, what I'm thinking about at least is how do I scale what I've learned to a much, much larger audience? Like, how do I take, which is one of the things I'm doing through the Expansive Woman Project, is working specifically with women, and through the Center for Expansive Leadership with other leaders. How can I scale these learnings? So now I'm thinking maybe that's my destiny, but I don't know. I have no idea.
It's also, Tom, you use the word destiny, but I think I'm hearing what is your purpose, right? And
Mm.
get to that
Oh,
purpose.
that's interesting. Yeah.
No,
So
no, I wasn't coming at it from that
Okay.
perspective, Gina, as much as, and I think, Judy, you used the word closed. To me, I would disagree with that. I'd say you're open now because you are truly living from the inside out. It's an
yeah.
evolving thing. That's destiny for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I can 100% agree with that. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the other question that I had was you said um, earlier, you were talking about comfort, a person seeking comfort over truth.
Hmm.
And uh, and that's a risky thing and can be painful. But is that, and yes, that can be the mark of a leader, or is it a mark of a masochist?
um, I don't know if you've been reading about Ray Dalio lately, but he likes to give like the brutal, awful truth to people. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not about you imposing truth on other people. It's about you bringing it home to your own truth. When I talk about comfort over truth, I'm talking about on a global scale, climate change. Right? And in organizations, there are so many unsaid truths that we all dance around that nobody really gets to the heart of. With individuals, there's things we don't want to think about because they're uncomfortable, but we know we have to work on them. We ignore things in our lives. We ignore problematic relationships, or, at work, we ignore a project we don't like. It's those kinds of things that cause us to subvert the truth in favor of our own comfort. So no, it's not about looking at somebody and saying terrible things. That's the opposite. Because I think when you do that, when you're pointing fingers, you're not looking at your own truth. There's no way you could be.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment or a question for Judy? Give it a second. The discomfort. As people are thinking, I'm going to ask you this question because I know we've got a few people who are lawyers online and who might be watching this. You've talked about firefighting for lawyers, and I know that you have worked with lawyers quite a bit. Firefighting is one of the themes of Stuckness, but so is feedback. You and I had this conversation before. Can you speak about what the challenge is for lawyers and feedback, and how that comes into being stuck and staying stuck?
Yeah, it's related to perfectionism, I think. So what I've noticed is the culture of law firms and the industry as a whole is it creates this very complicated relationship with feedback. And the relationship is, I want to progress through the organization. I want to be perfect in my work, and I want to be validated for that. So I want feedback if it's good. On the other hand, I don't want to be told anything, even the mildest thing that might interfere with my preconceived notion of who I should be. Right. So if you're telling me I'm not living up to a should value in some way, then I don't want to hear it at all. And I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to shut down. I'm going to shut down if I hear it. I hear a lot of tears. I hear a lot of just really people being very hard on themselves for humanness or human behaviors and emotions. So yeah, there is if I were to say there was one kind of systemic problem in the law industry, it would be that complicated relationship with feedback. From my perspective as leaders, because it means that a lot of things are left unsaid, and the relationship goes beyond that. It's like, I don't want to hear feedback, but I totally do, but I don't. And it also means I don't want to give you feedback because I don't want to crush you the way I was crushed when I was a young associate. So it's creating this very dysfunctional world where comfort is being prioritized over truth all the time.
And we had this conversation. I was at Canadian Women Defense Lawyers, and we had this conversation with a panel of young associates speaking to the rest of the group, which was fabulous because it had the partners, it had senior associates, and one of the comments was, please give us feedback. And in a conversation was, are you sure you want to get the feedback? And the answer was yes. Okay, but then the thinking by the senior partners was, am I going to deliver it in a way that will upset you or not? So it's this, as you said, I want it, but depends on how it's going to be delivered. And lawyers do not know how to give feedback. I've done mentor training for a number of years, and lawyers are nervous about giving feedback. Nobody's trained them to give feedback in a way that is supportive and not destructive necessarily. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, because it's both. It's the giver and the receiver of
Yeah.
the feedback that's problematic, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I would say too that those young associates, if they got feedback that they didn't like, they wouldn't necessarily want it so much anymore. It is true in all industries, but I think particularly in law that most people don't know how to give feedback at all. And correspondingly, we don't know how to take it either. So I've given very gentle feedback to lawyers who have shut down immediately. Like it's amazing, actually. I come from the tech world where feedback is valued and is a part of a product development process. And so it's actually sought, and even if it's bad, it's like, oh, that's awesome, thanks, I can now make this better. So it's a very different culture. So I was the first time I worked with a large group of lawyers, I was like really out of my depth for a little while there, because I'm like, what is going on? Just like know about, like, the feedback thing just was a big problem. So think of it this way: when you give or receive feedback, so let's talk about receiving feedback first. One, what is the intent of that person? Is it good or bad? And if somebody with a high need for significance giving you feedback may not be good, right? Or even a high need for certainty, because they might be coaching for compliance instead of empathy. So they just might want you to just do it my way, right? So judge the intention of that person. Judge the expertise of that person. So do they actually know what they're talking about? Not everybody does in all situations. And then judge the quality of the message they're trying to give you. Is this something I even care about? Okay, so if those three things come together, drop your emotion, get yourself centered, remember who you are, nice open posture, dig around, ask questions, get more information. Because people are terrible about giving feedback, they don't often tell you the thing they're trying to tell you, or it comes across in a way that doesn't make sense. Ask them to clarify and make sense, and do it from a place of curiosity instead of fear. Same goes, check in with yourself before you give feedback. What is your intention? Are you smacking someone down, or are you trying to get them to do stuff the way you want it? Or do you have an actual interest in their growth? Do you know what you're talking about? Sometimes we don't. I'm working with a marketer right now, and everybody in the engineering company she works for thinks that they know how to market better than she does. She's getting feedback all the time about, not good feedback. So do you know what you're talking about? And 3, is the quality of the message there? So is this something that is important, and will it be useful to the person receiving it? So if we could just learn those 2 things, like how to give and receive from that perspective, I think we'd go a long way. But again, it takes so much practice, and because it doesn't go well the first time, then we shut down, right? So it's almost like you need a permanent feedback coach.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that, and it's funny because one of the things that we talked about earlier is don't take things personally. But if you're getting feedback, it's personal, isn't it? Or are we not to take that personally?
We only take it personally. Oh, by the way, if the person's intention isn't good, if they're not an expert in if they don't meet all 3 criteria, do with that feedback as you will. Toss it aside. Don't take it personally. It's not about anything. All 3 have to be present for you to really find it useful. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I'm going to open it one more time before we let go. Anybody else have any questions? Just looking at hands. They're a quiet bunch today. Not at this point. So I'm not going to keep people. It's a whatever evening it is. It's a Tuesday evening. Since there aren't any other questions, I'm just going to say, Judy, thank you for this book. Thank you for your thoughts in it. I'm gonna I think I'm gonna be walking around saying, be a Roomba from now on. When you do it. Just pivot. I think it's really wonderful. If you wanted to connect with Judy and me, I'm just going to put the if I can, just to share the screen one last time so that we could see her email, and I'm hoping the right there we go. You've got Judy's email. You could read more about her and the work that she's doing at her website. So judy@judysims.com, and then www.judysims.com. And just a reminder to everybody that Judy was our final author for this year, our 11th author for this year. Next month, we're talking together about Michelle Obama's book. I'm not able to get Michelle with us, unfortunately, but we're going to have a different type of conversation. And any final thoughts? If somebody wants to get started, what's the one step that they can take sort of today to start getting unstuck, Judy? Is that a fair question to ask you?
It's a very good question. Okay, yeah. Recognize that you're defensive, reactive, judgmental.
Okay.
The way you can do that is I'll give you a little trick. Actually, you can, if you have an Android, download an app called Randomly Remind Me, and if you have an iPhone, an app called Mind Jogger.
Okay.
And what these apps do is they will randomly remind you throughout the day. You can set it to like 4 or 6 times, and it'll randomly go off like with a little gong.
Mm-hmm.
And when the gong hits, ask yourself, where am I right now? Is the world happening to me? Am I defensive, reactive, judgmental? Or am I making things happen? And that's how you start to understand how often you're in that contractive state.
I love that. What
Just
are those
start there.
sites again? Mind Jogger and
Mind Jogger for iPhone.
yeah.
And Randomly Remind Me, all one word, for Android.
Love it. Good, a good takeaway to end the day. To all of you, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching later on if you are watching. And Judy, it's always a pleasure. You take care. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
to let go. Really appreciate it.
I
Have a
really
good
enjoyed it.
evening, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye.